Located somewhere in Corby, Northamptonshire, lies a racetrack that compared to any other track in the UK was very unique in its design, with one being forgiven for thinking that it was out of place for a circuit in the UK. The circuit in question would be an oval, with the aim of attracting American series to come over to the UK and attract a European audience to their series, as well as having a road course to attract series that were based either in Europe or predominantly the UK. And I realise that's 4 times I've said the UK during this opening segment, but oh well. It would host various racing series for 17 years, however 2018 would end up being the last year that the circuit would host any motorsport action, with the circuit acting as a massive car park for an automotive logistics company before being bought out by Cinch to use as a testing ground. So as we sit here right now in 2025, the question that's probably on everyone's minds is this: what went wrong? This is the story of Rockingham Motor Speedway. The one in the UK, not the one in the US. Back in 1991, an entrepreneur by the name of Peter Davies, who himself did a little bit of racing, saw an abandoned bit of land on an old quarry site in Northamptonshire, and upon seeing this, saw an opportunity to initially create a test track. Having purchased the land in question, which was 383 acres, Davies then set about deciding what sort of circuit would be best suited to the land that he had acquired. Eventually, after much research and also going on a business trip to the US to watch some IndyCar, Peter had a light bulb moment and decided that rather than create a test track, he would instead create a fully fledged racing circuit, specifically a banked oval. The circuit would be named Dean Raceway, named after the former quarry site that the circuit would be built on, and after getting planning approval from the local council, it seemed everything was on track for the project to go ahead. However, despite the ambition, it became apparent that Peter didn't have the finances needed to develop such a project, and despite offers from different investors to help fund the project, all of which were from America, none of these offers materialised, and so for a few years, the land as it was previously was left abandoned. But undeterred from this setback, Peter was not going to give up, and in 1999, 3 days before the expiration date for the planning permission was due to expire, Davies hired out a JCB to dig out the land and lay down some tarmac in order to buy himself some time in trying to find investment. Eventually, that would come in the form of a financier by the name of Guy Hands, who would later go on to form the venture capital firm known as Firma Capital Partners. After striking a deal with Guy to bolster up the funding, construction of the circuit, which had now been renamed as the Rockingham Motor Speedway, named after a nearby castle, finally got underway in May of that same year, and funding would be bolstered even further thanks to a relationship with US racing mogul Gerald Forsyth, specifically through his Index group of companies. But the relationship between these two parties didn't just involve finances, as with Gerald being one of 3 men to own the kart series at the time, and with the series looking to expand into Europe, an opportunity presented itself, especially at the turn of the millennium, where after finances for the project were doubled, thanks to a management structure change brought in by Guy Hands, a deal was struck between Davies and Carr, which saw Rockingham granted a place on the kart calendar for 2001, twinned up with the Lausitzring Euro Speedway, which was also an oval located in Germany that had also just been constructed around the same time as Rockingham. However, a few months after the deal had struck, specifically in December 2000, Davies' time at Rockingham would sadly come to an end, as after a scathing board meeting, he, along with Christopher Tate and Robin Smith, both of which worked as a PR manager and finance director respectively, were dismissed from the project, with David Grace, a former hill climb champion, being brought in as Davies' successor. The circuit would finally be completed in January 2001 and would be formally opened by the Queen in May of that same year. The circuit itself would consist of 52,000 spectator seats, over 6,000 of which would be located in the Rockingham building on the pit straight, with the layout being very unique for an oval, with all 4 turns comprising of a very shallow 7.9 degree banking. Aside from the oval, there would also be various road courses situated within the oval, all of which could be seen from the grandstands, making it stand out from different circuits located in the UK. Keen to promote American-style racing in the UK, Rockingham that same year would set up their own stock car series known as the ASCAR Racing Series, which would act as the UK's answer to the American NASCAR series and would attract many big names from the UK, such as touring car legends Matt Neal and Jason Plato, as well as 1995 World Rally champion Colin McRae. But despite this, the main focus for Rockingham in its inaugural year would of course be the kart series. However, by the time kart arrived at the circuit on the 19th of September, it's safe to say that fate was not on the circuit's side for many reasons. During the weekend of the inaugural Rockingham 500, the minds of kart team members were elsewhere, following the 9/11 terror attacks that happened the previous week, as well as the horrific crash that Alex Zanardi sustained at Euro Speedway, which saw him lose both of his legs. The mood in the paddock would be compounded even further when crews were forced to wait an awfully long time for practice to get underway, as overnight rain from the previous day exposed a flaw in Rockingham's track surface, as after initially drying up, water from underneath the ground would seep its way back onto the surface, making the conditions undrivable. As a result, Friday's running would have to be cancelled, which meant that Saturday's running had to be hastily rescheduled, which led to the amount of practice time being limited, as well as the race having its distance reduced from 500 miles to just over 200 in order to not run into any issues with daylight, given the circuit didn't have any lighting. Thankfully though, the race would go without a hitch, and it would see an amazing fight for the lead between Kenny Brack and the late Gilles de Ferran, which in the end saw Gilles come out on top. Kart would return to Rockingham the following year in 2002, this time doing the intended 500 miles, and unlike 2001, the schedule would go ahead without any issues, with Dario Franchitti grabbing a popular home win ahead of eventual champion Cristiano D'Amata and Patrick Carpentier. But despite this, 2002 would end up being Kart's last year at Rockingham, as poor attendance figures from the circuit, which only saw half the capacity turn up on race day, saw Rockingham lose the contract to Brands Hatch, who would only host one race in 2003, making it the last time the series raced in the UK before merging with IndyCar in 2008. This ultimately led to a change in management, with David Grace being cast aside to make way for Ashley Povey and Joe Dickinson, who would also end up becoming the majority owners when Guy Hans decided to sell his shares and stand down. With kart no longer being a feature for Rockingham, the focus shifted to the self-owned ASCAR Racing Series, as well as the British Superbike Championship, which started to race around a configuration of the road course the same year Rockingham opened its doors. However, a disastrous meeting in 2003 would see BSB not return to Rockingham from 2004, as safety lines that were installed on the circuit to act as an out-of-bounds area for the bikes would prove to be too dangerous, leading to qualifying being cancelled as a result of one of the competitors completely destroying their bike upon crossing into the out-of-bounds area. With two-wheel action completely gone and the self-created ASCAR series dying a slow death in 2008, a new focus was needed to get the circuit back on its feet, and when it was bought out by a Northern Irish consortium in 2006, that's exactly what happened. The new owners would put more emphasis on the road course, with the main attraction coming from the British Touring Car Championship, which after hosting a meeting at the circuit in 2003, would make its return in 2007 using a different layout to the one they used in 2003. Along with also attracting British F3 and British GT to the circuit would also open up to track days, increasing the number of days the track would be open throughout a calendar year. Suddenly, the circuit was now in a healthy situation, and when it was brought out again in 2013 by the jury investment group Grey Rock via the Bella Partnership Company, the focus of road course racing would still be on top of their agenda, with the oval racing pretty much becoming a distant memory, as reflected by the circuit quietly dropping the Motor Speedway part of their name, simply referring to themselves as just Rockingham. The circuit would continue to thrive for the next few years. However, in 2016, disaster would hit the circuit, as Bella Partnership would end up going into administration following their separation from parent company Grey Rock. This meant that a new buyer was needed for the circuit, with the sale being listed as a development opportunity. However, luckily for the circuit, the racing schedule for the next 2 years would not be affected. Eventually though, in 2018, Rockingham would finally get sold to a local company called Rockingham Automotive Limited. However, sadly for motorsport fans, it wouldn't be a positive takeover, as 2018 would end up being the last time that Rockingham would host any motorsport events, as the new owners planned to repurpose the circuit as a storage facility for a lot of used cars. And with that brought to an end Rockingham's time hosting motorsport events. And so, to refer back to the question I asked earlier, what went wrong? Well, from the off, it was always going to be difficult to attract a British crowd, let alone a European crowd, to oval-style racing, which was the circuit's main focus at the time when it first opened. And this was reflected in the attendance figures, as during Kart's second year at Rockingham, only half of the circuit's capacity turned up to watch the Rockingham 500, which in turn ended up being the reason why Rockingham lost the contract to Brands Hatch. This ended up killing oval racing in the UK before it even took off, as with ASCAR struggling to get attendance figures, not helped by the fact that Rockingham was the only oval in the UK, with the only other track the series went to being the Lausitzring in Germany, it made the oval part of the track pretty redundant. When the focus shifted from oval racing to road course racing, it seemed like the circuit was finally hitting the ground running and were finally in a healthy state, even if the oval part was a massive flop. So when their last owners, Bella Partnership, ended up going into administration in 2016, it really was a massive hammer blow for the circuit and left a lot of uncertainties as to what would happen to the circuit after 2018. And whilst a buyer would be found, it wasn't a buyer that would mark great news for the circuit, as thanks to the sale of the circuit being pitched as a development opportunity, it meant that pretty much anyone could be eligible to buy it and use the site for whatever purpose. And that's exactly what Rockingham Automotive Limited would do when they purchased the circuit, as they decided that rather than use the circuit to host various motorsport events, they would instead use the site as a massive car park to store over 20,000 used vehicles. Rockingham would host what they dubbed a Super Send-Off event in November 2018 to mark its final day as a racing circuit before handing the keys to the new owners. And when seeing aerial shots of the circuit with the used cars stored in it, it looked a sorry sight for many motorsport fans, with the circuit clearly screaming for race cars to fly past there. Now normally at this point when I do these sorts of videos, I would often say my feelings about the closure and why I wish things would pan out differently. However, on this occasion, I'm not going to do that, because surprisingly, there does appear to be some hope for the circuit, as 2 years after Rockingham closed its doors to racing, it was revealed that insurance company Cinch had purchased the circuit from Rockingham Automotive Limited and would end up bringing the circuit back to life in some capacity, with them clearing out the used cars that were sitting there and repurposing the circuit as a test track for certain car tests on their social media platforms. They also don't appear to have any plans to knock down any of the grandstands that surround the circuit, despite the previous owners having approval from the local council to demolish the structures. The circuit still doesn't have any motorsport events racing around the circuit, but with Cinch clearly being keen to give the circuit a new leash of life, there may be hope yet that Rockingham may make a comeback on the motorsport calendar, and personally speaking, I really hope it does. As someone who is a massive fan of the British Touring Car Championship, it would be amazing to see the circuit return to the calendar, as the series did often produce some great racing around the circuit. But we will wait and see what the future holds, but I think I speak for everyone that Cinch buying the circuit is a very good starting point. Let's just hope they give us fans what we want.